No one can easily forget that until recently, the education sector was in a sorry state. From basic to secondary and tertiary education system, the story was the same. The sector had everything but a conducive teaching and learning environment. Obviously aware of the huge decay confronting the sector, the Ministry of Education mapped out strategy on the best way to tackle the challenges in the sector. The Education for Change Agenda and the Ministerial Strategic Plan (MSP) became a formidable working document. The policies, programs and actions were anchored on 10 pillars outlined in the policy document. A worrisome trend among the 10 pillars is the alarming number of out-of-school children phenomenon, seen as a national embarrassment. With no accurate and workable figures to ascertain the bigger picture of many children roaming the streets, conflicting figures of 10 to 13 million have been paraded over the years. But the reasons for the out-of-school children phenomenon are not far-fetched. Inadequate financing, violent conflicts, ignorance on the part of parents and guardians, distance to schools, and the increasing number of physically challenged children and those rendered orphans by insurgency in the northeast. However, the Ministry of Education has made significant progress to address the challenges of out-of-school children through the flag-off of 2018-2019 annual school census, focusing on the use of mobile technology as a veritable tool for timely, credible and reliable education data. The development of 4 strategic interventions on special education, boy-child education, girl-child education and Tsangea Almajiri aims at mopping up out-of-school children in Nigeria. Moreover, the school feeding program of the Buhari administration in some states of the Federation has led to unprecedented increase in school enrollment, with a drastic drop in the number of out-of-school children nationwide. Apart from the high number of out-of-school children, youth and adult illiteracy also poses a threat to the education sector. Nigeria has an estimated 60.5 million adult and youth who are illiterates. This represents 39% of the country's population.
For example, Aja is eating. Kofi is...
Lack of adequate funding for mass literacy programs in the media, difficulty in acquiring land for mass literacy centers, and nonchalant attitude of targeted population have remained huge barriers. In spite of the challenges, the ministry, through the National Commission for Mass Literacy, Adult and Non-Formal Education, has acquired thousands of motorcycles for the motoring of adult literacy programs across the Federation. These initiatives have no doubt yielded impressive results, as more than 50,000 Nigerians who were hitherto illiterates can now read and write, and more Nigerians will become literate by 2020. And as the world becomes a global village, Nigeria cannot afford to be relegated to the background in the area of science, technology, engineering and mathematics, and technical and vocational education and training. Before now, most science laboratories and technical workshops in federal government colleges were in dilapidated conditions with inadequate ICT facilities to improve learning. To address this, the Ministry of Education in the last 4 years has constructed 80 sets of modern prototype science, mathematics and ICT laboratories and technical workshops in federal government colleges and selected secondary schools across the Federation. This follows the upgrading of the existing 21 federal science and technical colleges to promote TVET education. Basic education remains the foundation of all learning. In the last few years, this important subsector suffered neglect from states and local governments due to their inability to provide counterpart fund to enable them access federal government's matching grant. The results: dilapidated school structures, overcrowded classrooms, children sitting on the floor to learn in many rural schools, lack of qualified teachers and teacher motivation. The story was not different in some secondary schools system. The challenge of insecurity in the northeast, caused by Boko Haram insurgents, and the incidents of kidnapping in some parts of the country have been major problems in the schools. To address poor funding of the basic education subsector, the federal government, through the Universal Basic Education Commission UBEC intervention, has disbursed 350 billion naira in the last 4 years. With the investments in secondary education, federal government intervention focused on provision of perimeter fencing in federal government colleges, street lights powered by solar systems, and modern security gates. It is usually said that if you want to hide information from Nigerians or young people, to be specific, keep it in a book. That was the hopeless state school children and the youth found themselves. The apparent disappearance of reading culture among young people was due to lack of reading spaces for them. Outdated books, unstable electricity supply, untidy toilets, and lack of running water where libraries existed. While the ministry awaits the completion of the National Library of Nigeria, renovation of libraries in Lagos, Benue, Nasarawa, Imo, Adamawa and Plateau, as well as the establishment of new branches in other parts of the country, are expected to revive the reading culture among pupils and students. This will eventually improve learning outcomes in school. Interestingly, the tertiary education institutions are gearing up for the deployment of e-libraries and e-books that will put an end to handouts in the system.
25 in base 10 to base 2 base 2. What do? We divide 25 by 2.
Teachers are seen as makers of men and molders of destiny, and so they play a central role in nation building. Now, when teachers are in short supply, especially qualified teachers, the education sector suffers a setback. That was the scenario in the past years. But in the last 4 years, this ugly trend is becoming history, with the registration of 1.8 million teachers by the Teachers Registration Council of Nigeria. Moreover, 3,605 personnel have been employed by the Ministry of Education to address the challenges of teacher shortage in basic and secondary schools. Admittedly, the tertiary education subsector has its own tales of woes as a result of funding gaps. In many tertiary education institutions, dilapidated infrastructure and abandoned projects spoke for themselves. In the past years, the word "short put" was a slang expression among students on campuses due to lack of toilet facilities in the hostels. To make matters worse, distortion in the academic calendar form part of the learning process for students in public higher education institutions.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong.
With education at the forefront of the federal government agenda, the restoration of the tertiary education institutions as citadels of learning is yet another avenue for the Ministry of Education to win the hearts of intelligentsia. In the last 4 years, the Ministry of Education has indeed witnessed massive investments of physical infrastructure for teaching and learning in the cutting-edge researches and capacity building for scholars in public tertiary education institutions under the Tertiary Education Trust Fund, TETFund intervention. The place of religion in the moral development of the children cannot be overemphasized. So, when such subjects as Christian religious knowledge and Islamic religious knowledge were not taught in schools, there was an outcry by Nigerians. But today, CRK and IRK have become standalone subjects in schools, just as the study of history as a subject, which was earlier removed, has been restored in schools across the Federation. In the same vein, lack of policy direction and counseling in the basic and secondary schools had negative impact on the retention and completion rate of students, resulting to increase in the number of out-of-school children and also in antisocial behavior in schools. Little wonder the Ministry of Education developed national policy on counseling to redesign and streamline the duties of counselors and their relationship with other school personnel. Expectations are high that this move will address the problems of truancy, cultism, exam malpractices, drug abuse, and sexual harassment in school environment. In the education sector, lack of accurate data makes planning very difficult. It is against this background that the ministry launched and disseminated the 2015-2016 Nigeria Digest of Education Statistics and the Nigerian Education Indicator. Similarly, the ministry harmonized the 2016-2017 annual school census to produce the 2017-2018 Nigeria Digest of Education Statistics. And in a world of information and communication technology, there is a strong belief that Nigeria can only attain excellence and global competitiveness in the economy with the use of ICT. So, when ICT was not integrated into the education curriculum, it was like students were still living in the dark ages. But in the last 4 years, the Ministry of Education has made giant strides in the provision of ICT facilities in schools.
By what? End user. You can sit down and create your software. Like this word is made by what? End user.
As the ministry signed memorandum of understanding with private computer companies and international development partners, teaching and learning with computers became an exciting experience for teachers and students in the 104 federal government colleges. With the tremendous achievements recorded in the education sector in the last 4 years, the sector, no doubt, is gradually regaining its lost identity through adequate and effective funding by the Muhammadu Buhari-led administration. As the sector strives to become world-class with the pursuit of the real objectives in the defined and focused disciplines with the Education for Change and the Ministerial Strategic Plan, Nigerians can only expect to see more progress in the coming years. Indeed, a positive impact that will be felt by humanity and generations to come.